Hi everyone, welcome back to Timeless Tales. I'm Mr. Wolf. Today, we journey back to the ancient world, to a kingdom on the Black Sea, and uncover the story of a man whose name became synonymous with poison, power, and a relentless defiance of Rome. This is the story of Mithridates VI, the Poison King of Pontus. Our story begins not in a palace, but in hiding. After the suspicious death of his father, a young Mithridates fled into the wilderness. He knew his own mother favored his younger brother for the throne, and that his own life was in constant peril. For 7 years, he lived a Spartan existence, sleeping on the cold ground, hunting for his food, and hardening his body and mind. But it was during this self-imposed exile that he began his life's most famous and most dangerous experiment. Mithridates was obsessed with toxicology. He understood that poison was the silent weapon of kings, the preferred tool of assassins and usurpers to survive in a world where a single drop in a cup of wine could mean the end. He decided not just to study poisons, but to conquer them. He began a daily ritual known as Mithridatism. He would ingest tiny non-lethal doses of various toxins, arsenic, hemlock, snake venom, and more. Day by day, week by week, he gradually increased the dosage, forcing his body to build a tolerance to create its own defense. He was forging himself into a man who could not be poisoned. He wasn't just building an immunity, he was crafting a legend. When he finally returned to his capital Sinope, he was no longer a boy. He was a hardened survivor, a master of poisons, and a king ready to claim his birthright. He swiftly imprisoned his mother and brother, securing the throne of Pontus for himself. With his kingdom secure, he turned his gaze outward. To the west, a colossal power was expanding, consuming everything in its path. The Roman Republic. Mithridates saw Rome not as a potential partner, but as a ravenous beast, an existential threat to his people and his way of life. A deep, burning hatred for Rome took root in his heart, a hatred that would define his entire reign. Mithridates was a brilliant and charismatic leader. He spoke over 20 languages and saw himself as a successor to Alexander the Great, a champion of the East against the encroaching West. He began to expand his own empire, annexing neighboring territories and forging alliances. He built a formidable army and a powerful navy, all in preparation for the inevitable conflict with the Titan of the Mediterranean. Rome, embroiled in its own internal conflicts, initially underestimated him, viewing him as just another provincial king with grand ambitions. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The conflict, when it finally erupted, was brutal. The First Mithridatic War began with a horrifying act of calculated violence. In 88 BC, Mithridates orchestrated a massive, coordinated slaughter of Roman and Italian settlers across Anatolia. On a single day, an estimated 80,000 men, women, and children were killed in an event that would forever be known as the Asiatic Vespers. This was not just an act of war. It was a declaration of total, uncompromising hatred. He sent a bloody message to Rome. This would be a war of annihilation. Rome was stunned. They sent one of their best generals, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, to deal with the Pontic threat. The wars that followed were epic in scale, spanning decades and involving some of the most famous names in Roman history, including Lucullus and, later, Pompey the Great. Mithridates proved to be an incredibly resilient foe. He would lose battles, lose territories, and be driven to the very brink of defeat. Yet he always found a way to rebound, to raise a new army, and to continue the fight. His personal immunity to poison made him seem almost supernatural, a king who could not be defeated by the assassin's cowardly methods. But Rome's resources were virtually limitless. After 3 long and devastating wars, the tide turned decisively against him. Defeated by Pompey, the great Mithridates was forced to flee. His armies shattered, his empire crumbling. He ended up in the Crimea, a desperate king with a broken kingdom. Yet even then, his spirit of defiance was not extinguished. He began planning one last, audacious gamble, a massive invasion of Italy itself, a march on Rome from the north. It was a plan born of desperation, a final roar from a wounded lion. But it was a fantasy he would never realize. His own troops, weary from decades of constant warfare and seeing the plan as suicidal, mutinied. They were led by the one person he never expected to betray him, his own son and chosen heir, Pharnicus, trapped in his citadel, with his son's army at the gates. The great king of Pontus saw that his story was at its end. The man who had spent a lifetime conquering poison now reached for it as a final escape. He administered a powerful dose to himself, the same toxin that had felled lesser men in seconds, and he waited, but nothing happened. The very immunity he had so carefully cultivated throughout his life now became his ultimate curse. The poison that was meant to be his merciful exit had no effect. In a final tragic irony, the Poison King was unable to die by his own hand. Seeing no other way, Mithridates turned to his loyal bodyguard and commanded him to do what the poison could not. The soldier, with tears in his eyes, drew his sword and granted his king the death he had been denied. So ended Mithridates VI, the great enemy of Rome, a man of fierce intellect, relentless ambition, and a hatred so profound it fueled a lifetime of war. His legacy is complex, a ruthless butcher to the Romans, but a Hellenic hero to many in the East. His lifelong quest to conquer poison ensured his survival for decades, only to fail him in his final moments. His story is a timeless tale of how even the greatest strengths can become our most tragic weaknesses. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the past. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more timeless tales. Until next time, stay curious.